Welcome back to the Prince Armory Academy. This video will be a tutorial for how to build the leg armor in the Berserker series. We'll be picking up where we left off from building the sabatons and the greaves for the lower legs, and we'll go over the full build of the cuisses or upper legs here, and then we'll bring everything together. This design is fully articulated, and we'll touch on that a little later in the video. This video was made with support from Weaver Leather Supply, and for this build we'll be using Weaver Select Vegetable Tan Leather. The leather, tools, and many of the supplies you'll see in my videos can be found at weaverleathersupply.com. Please consider checking out the website using my link in the description. The weight of leather I'm using for this build is 9 to 10 ounces, but as always you're free to use heavier or lighter weight leather if you wish, but this weight of leather will give us a good balance of density and firmness. This design is part of a complete series that you can build yourself, and the patterns for this build come with PDFs that you can print with any normal printer at home and cut by hand. It also includes files you can use for laser cutting, so I'll be using the Nova 16 from Eon Laser USA to cut out the parts. This project has a lot of larger components, so the larger bed size of this machine comes in really handy. Leather's a natural product, and from time to time there will be blemishes that you have to avoid, so that's something to keep in mind when you're laying out the parts. It's quite easy to move the pieces around in the software before cutting. And if you do make a mistake as I did here, you can always just recut that piece. I'll start with the cuisse parts first. These form the upper legs and have many articulating layers. I found that I can reduce the scorching around the edge by slowing things down, and I believe this has a lot to do with letting the air assist have time to blow out the debris. So one of the things I want to test next is hooking up an external air compressor to see how it affects cutting performance. Here I'm cutting out the knee components. Next we need to shape the pieces. As always, start by dipping the pieces into water briefly, and for laser cut pieces, give the edges a little scrub. We also need to make all of the decorative shape lines, but I've already touched on this creasing wheel in a previous video, and I'll make a standalone video on this soon too, so I won't go into full detail here. But in short, this is a game changer for making creases and raised flutes in leather. It's a 3D printable embossing wheel set that I designed to fit on a typical affordable metal bead roller, and the STL can also be found at our academy, along with some alternative tools and methods to achieve the same result. It's still beneficial to finesse some of the lines by hand using traditional methods for shaping leather, which are also explained in more detail in other lessons at our academy. The texture for most of this suit is simply made with a bone fed. Ashley must have done miles and miles of delicate little lines throughout the suit so far. If you're wondering about the black segment on the tool, she decided to wrap it with some self-adhesive bandage for comfort. Just a quick reminder that we have an active Discord with over 2,000 members, where you can talk shop and chat with fellow makers and artists. We love to see your creations in the Apprentice Gallery too. Plus, it's a great way to get inspiration from other students and get ideas for your own builds. I'll pre-assemble some of the knee parts. The side guard of the outside knee needs to be riveted together as shown. Then some rivets can be added to close the piece to its final shape. One extra step you may want to do on pieces that will be overlapped is to skive down the bottom layer a little bit to smooth out the transition between the pieces. It's a good habit to get into. The rest of the parts will be assembled after they are dyed and finished. The pieces are being dyed black using Fiebing's Pro Oil Black Dye. All of the parts are being finished with Weaver's Tough Coat with a generous application to ensure saturation into the leather, which will firm up all of the pieces. We'll resume the assembly with parts K and L. The geometry of this piece makes it a little challenging to assemble, so if you have a foot press you can use it, but you can also get by with normal hand setting methods. And I get asked about this tool a lot. It's a metal planishing stake set from Pepe Tools, and it comes in really handy for armor crafting and shaping leather, and for assembling advanced shapes in leather. We'll start adding the retaining straps. These have indicating marks to show where each strap goes. Now let's move on to part E, which can be considered either the bottom of the knee or the top of the greave. Up next, we'll do parts F and G. The knee cop itself is part H, and we'll skip it for now because it'll cover access to the pieces sitting underneath it. So we'll reverse directions here and go to the top starting with part M. Then we'll attach the previously combined parts K and L. It's fine to turn these parts over and set them flat from behind as these will be covered completely. Then we'll attach the plates J and then I as we move back down towards the knee. And now we can attach the knee cop. I'm wetting the strap here to make the leather a little more pliable. And instead of riveting, it'll be far easier and sturdier to use Chicago screws, at least for this particular point. Just be sure to glue up the screws and lock them in place permanently when you're confident you have everything together properly. And for the side of the knee cop with the guard, you can optionally put in some leather washers just to give a little extra clearance for the guard. All of the components along the sides will also be using Chicago screws. Chicago screws are far stronger than rivets, and they don't rely on being pressure fit, so it allows the components to hinge off the hardware smoothly, thus maximizing mobility and functionality. We'll move on to the upper legs now, but make note of this connection point on part M where the retaining strap will eventually connect. I'm starting the upper leg parts with a suspending strap. Normally I would do a buckle strap that loops over on itself, but I'm trying something new with staggered line 24 snaps for adjustment. This will later loop over a belt worn at the waist, and will help support the weight of the legs and to hold them in place. There are some additional holes should you wish to reinforce the legs with additional straps later. Next, attach the straps to part S, T, and U. You'll be attaching the retaining straps to the holes further away from the decorative crease line. Here too, the Chicago screws will join the pieces along the sides. Many of these leg parts will feature elongated slots on the underlapping piece. This allows for sliding articulation. This will improve the range of motion. Each piece only slides a little bit, and this is in part due to the limitations of leather as a medium. If the slots were much larger, the Chicago screws would be at risk of easily popping out, and this is something to keep in mind if you're using alternative mediums. In very thin leather or foam, for example, it wouldn't hold up without reinforcing the contact points. Each slot only allows for a little bit of extra movement for each layer, but over the complete assembly, it adds up, which is important because the design of this leg extends up higher than most leg armor designs, and it would be cumbersome otherwise. From here, make your way down to part R, Q, P, O, and N, following the same process and aligning the retaining straps with their corresponding reference symbols. Also note that when connecting the Chicago screws, you don't have to tighten them fully. In fact, leaving just a little bit of slack between each plate will help with mobility. When the cuisses are finished, you can finally attach them and the greaves to the knees. And now we can get ready to put on the straps. The position of the straps will vary from person to person, but most of you should be able to copy what I'm doing here. But it's important to do a test fit, and make sure you're wearing your intended garments and footwear, then mark the buckle straps accordingly to be sure. If you need more help with making buckle straps and fitting the armor, please check the additional free content available in our academy. For the upper legs, I decided to make a quick release mechanism to the straps. This will just make it a little easier to get in and out of the armor. The straps will work normally, but there's a bridge piece that connects the straps to the legs using snaps. Now that the leg is assembled, you can get a better idea of how the articulations work. The knees are pretty obvious and are sort of a compound hinge, but the sections with the sliding Chicago screws, these add up to allow for a lot more range of motion while still covering a broad area. The backs of the creases are not covered, and this is a trade-off for additional comfort and mobility. Should you wish, you could add a plate to cover this gap. The retaining straps not only allow for more mobility, they also limit the individual plates from extending too far or binding in weird ways. The thinner leather that we use for retaining straps will also break in over time, so I designed things to start out tight, and then after a few times of being worn, it should be optimal. You can and should also oil the straps from time to time, which will keep them supple and keep them from drying out and cracking over time. This is why we usually don't use acrylic finish for the internal straps. This would cause extra stiffness and work against us for mobility. The fronts and backs of the greaves also need to be put together. The greaves facing the outside of the leg are marked for permanent connection using Chicago screws, and we'll put the straps on the greaves on the inside of the leg, and this will be easier to strap up when you're putting on the armor by yourself. We'll be finishing the Berserker armor over the coming videos, and if you enjoyed this build, please like the video and subscribe to our channel to see the full reveal when it's done.